Hello everybody. Let's talk about this page over here. Now this is what's called a flow template introduction page. You'll basically give you some good information about the flow template that you want to set up. So here it gives you the title of the flow and the description. It also tells you what the trigger of the flow is and what applications or connectors the flow will use. And I'll ask you if there are any permissions or any things that you need to register with to actually use the flow. Now this is again a very simple example. If we go back and choose a more complicated flow, like let's use this guy over here on different applications, you can kind of see that it's the same sort of page. I'll tell you the trigger is from Microsoft Forms. The applications that it actually uses are these 4 applications. And at the bottom it'll tell you, hey, you need to basically connect to these different things before you use the flow. So you need to be able to connect to Microsoft Forms, Excel Online, 365 users, and there are permissions issue here, and 365 Outlook. And for example, if you do want to connect to Microsoft Forms, what do you have to do is click the plus sign. They'll then give you a little sign in info and you've connected. But we don't want to connect to Microsoft Forms for now. So let's go back and let's click the one that we were on. So let's go back to this one, and then what you have to do is click the plus sign over here. I've already done it, which is why you don't see mine, and it'll basically try to connect to that connector using the credentials that you've logged in with. So we'll try to connect to the Mail app using the login that you used originally. Now, if for some reason that does not work, that's fine. Basically, if as we go through the exercise, you'll see that we can change mail, or we'll change the action here to anything, Gmail, Yahoo Mail, Outlook, anything like that. You'll see that we can change this to whatever email service that we want to use. Let's talk about how scopes can be used for error handling. Here we have a scope that includes 2 actions. Now before what we had is something like this, right? Imagine the scope doesn't exist. We trigger a flow, then we post a Slack message, then we have an HTTP server request, and then based on if the succeeds or fails. If it succeeds, it goes over here. If it fails, it goes over here. However, what if you also want to have an error handle for this step? Well, something you could do very easily is basically just break this up into parallel branches as well, right? So if you want to basically make sure that you have error handling for this step here, so that this step messes up for whatever reason, then the flow still messages the person saying that the flow itself has stopped working right, because what we had before. If you remember is we have this action configured to only run after if this action had failed, right? Now this action over here. Well, if this action fails, then it won't get down to the step, because then the flow will just stop. So how do you correct that? Right, because you want this to be sent out no matter if this stuff fails or this stuff fails. So let's add another parallel branch over here, and we can choose this guy here to be, another Slack message. Click post message. Being changed this to general and basically have the same thing as over here. Okay, great. Now we have 2 error handling. So if also what we need to do is obviously configure the run to basically make this be failed. Okay, now we have 2 error handling steps. So we have, first, if you ignore the scope because the scope has nothing in it, if you will first try to basically post this message. If it fails, then it sends or tries to send another message saying that the flow that you shared has failed. We might want to do is actually change this to be like an email instead, not a Slack message, because obviously if this fails then this fails too, but this is our catch block over here. If this succeeds, I'll then make the HTTP request. If that fails, then it'll basically send a Slack message saying the same thing. If it succeeds, then it'll basically go through the conditions over here. Now see how complex this kind of is looking out? You don't want every action to have a try-catch block, right? You want a series of actions for this flow to try, and if any action within the series of actions fails, then it basically goes to the error handling step. So what we can do here is first, let's delete this guy. Let's put these into the scope. And now let's configure this so that this should only run after all of the steps within the scope have successfully completed. So we can click Configure Run After and we can change this to Now It's Failed, but now see what the difference is here. Basically this will run, not if this succeeds or if this fails and this fails, but it's if either or fails, because if either this one or this one fails, then the whole scope will fail, which then will trigger this guy to occur here. So that's the big difference here. Scopes not only allows you to organize actions as a group, but also allow you to then say, okay, if anything in this group fails, then do this error handling step. Now to go back to developments that I know not everybody knows code here, but if you do, this will be super helpful. You know, in any sort of coded language, you have a try, you have a catch, and you have a finally. So here what we're doing is we're grouping these two steps together and one try option and one scope and saying that if any step within this try fails then it goes to the catch block, which is the error handling steps, which is over here. Now this is the key thing here. What we're basically doing is mimicking the try-catch concept that we have very good familiarity with in development in any sort of coding language, with flows and scopes really allow you to do that because they allow you to group several steps or actions together. And there you have it. That's how scopes can be used to basically mimic the try and catch error handling block, which is the more preferred way of error handling in your flows. At this point, you should have a basic familiarity with Power Automate and making flows, so you know how to create the development environment, you know what each of these screens does. You can basically create your own flow using templates that have been provided that cover a lot of the reasons you would need to use flows. After you basically make a flow, you can then go into that flow and you can edit it and make very simple edits such as change the search term or change the email destination and everything like that. And you can make some very, very cool flows, you know, using the templates that we have, even if you do need to connect to different connectors such as Twitter or Mail. That's basically the goal for this basic section. Before I would move on to the beginner intermediate section, I would definitely recommend everyone basically looking or going to templates and making a flow here that you're interested in making that we haven't made before. And it doesn't have to be Twitter or Mail related, you know. We can even be something like send self a reminder in 10 minutes. It can be something like, you know, the best thing to do is to go to this page and click featured, and these are probably the most popular flows. So go into one of these and choose something and try it out again. What you'll need to do is once you go in, you'll need to give Microsoft Power Automate access to these things. But after that, creating a flow from a template is very simple, especially if the template is made by Microsoft itself. So I would definitely recommend you try to make your own flow from a template before you move on. But if you don't, obviously that's fine too.